Welcome everyone to the Alliance meeting this week as part of the 16 Days of Activism. Thank you for joining us for this exciting event about digital harms. We have three fantastic speakers on our panel today. We have Davison, President of the National Council of Women, Atonte Semira, Head of Community at the UN Women UK, and we have Rebecca Zerk from the University of Aberystwyth. So welcome to our three speakers. We're really looking forward to hearing your contributions. And what we'll do is we'll hear from our speakers and then try to save the questions, the Q&A for afterwards, just to make sure that we've got enough time. So if you can make note of any questions as we go throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat. We can come back to them, but there will be an opportunity as well to ask questions via the call when everyone's presented. So I think I'll start with Davison, President of the National Council of Women, who's going to lay the foundation on the topic of digital harms for us. So thank you, Anne, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I really welcome this opportunity because I would like to issue a rallying cry to us all to get behind the problem. It's huge. Lots of people and organisations are working on internet harms. They're taking each a little corner of the problem. They might be looking at misinformation, misogyny, violence, pornography, body shaming, bullying, women leaders, child development, mental health. But you put all that together and it's a massive public health issue. And I think one of the problems is that it's being thought of as an information science issue. It's actually a health issue, and we should be talking to the Department of Health about it. It's also an economic issue. Young people are going on health benefits instead of working, or they can't get jobs because they lack the soft skills that came from getting out and about rather than immersion in the online world. There's a burden on schools, on local councils, and on the NHS. And then, of course, democracy is undermined by misinformation, by social media bubbles that we get stuck in so that we don't hear the other side, and by short-termism and intolerance. And it beggars belief, really, that we didn't apply from the beginning the principle that what is illegal offline should also be illegal online. Anyway, let's focus today on public health. That's enough, I think, for starters. Let's start with the early years. So health professionals are so concerned, they've set up an organisation to deal with the problem and to give advice to parents and to lobby to ban social media from children under 16. And this is called Health Professionals for Safer Screens. And it's not just psychologists and psychiatrists whom you might expect, but also paediatricians, GPs, occupational therapists, and opticians. And so this is what they say. As clinicians, we witness these harmful effects daily in our clinics, and academics are now establishing causal connections. Smartphones, screens, and social media usage impact every part of our children's lives, from their early cognitive development through to their physical development. Obesity, eyesight, eating disorders, through to their social development, mental health, and academic attainment. What evidence have we got to back it up? Special educational needs support has increased by 44% since 2016. 1 in 5 pupils are now receiving SEND assistance. They need help struggling with their speech, language, and communication. And research shows that the early use of tablets and other electronic devices can have a detrimental effect on the development of the brain. Social skills and attention are especially affected. So there are multiple studies now associating higher mobile device and screen use in toddlers with poorer expressive language. We can't load this burden onto parents. It's much too difficult for them. They're up against an industry led by some of the cleverest people in the world, making huge sums of money through algorithms. And they deliberately feed provocative content to keep consumers online for advertising. 47% of parents report a disagreement with their children over screen time in just the last week that they were reporting. It's a vicious cycle because the parents get overwhelmed, and then they pacify the child by giving them screen time, and the whole thing starts again. Moving on to school children, receiving a smartphone before the age of 13 is linked to poorer mental health in young adulthood, including suicidal thoughts, emotional instability, and reduced self-worth. Early social media use accounts for 40% of this impact, according to an academic study. And the kids themselves know this isn't a good idea. A poll in the UK of 16 to 17-year-olds found that 1/3 believe the age limit for social media accounts should be 14 to 15, and 1/3 favour 16 to 17-year-olds. Only 4% said there should be no limit. You may have seen the Girl Guiding Survey. Let's take a look at how this is affecting girls. So in general, 1 in 10 girls aged 11 to 16 have missed school to avoid sexual harassment. Over half of 11 to 18-year-olds have taken care not to appear too confident in front of boys. More than 1 in 4 girls feel sad most days or every day, compared with 1 in 10 in 2015. Experiences of misogyny start as young as 7 years old. 1 in 3 girls aged 7 to 10 have experienced a comment from boys at school that made them feel uncomfortable. And the majority of girls and young women aged 11 to 18 have described boys at their school making comments they'd describe as toxic. When asked why girls their age were experiencing mental health and well-being challenges, nearly 40% aged 11 to 18 said they thought the impact of sexism and misogyny was the reason. 58% of young women and girls faced online harassment, and most girls report their first experience at between 14 and 16 years, but some tragically as early as 9. There was a 2022 study that found that over half of teens exposed to pornography reported seeing violent forms, such as choking, someone in pain, or depictions of what appears to be rape. And I don't know if you've seen that a young woman is taking the government to court for her exposure to phones at school and the effect it's had on her school life. In her case, she's reported seeing violence that was particularly disturbing rather than pornography. Let's go on to women. According to UN Women, studies across the world show that 16 to 58% of women and girls have been targeted by violence online. And of course, the impacts follow them outside the digital sphere. It's a significant threat to women's rights and safety, both online and off. Every generation has to fight their battles on misogyny. For this generation, it really is an online battle. Extreme online pornography affects real life violence, abuse, and relationships. We had a young woman report to us her experience of strangulation, and thank goodness this has now been made illegal in pornography, because it just gets copied. Meanwhile, Refuge has reported a 62% rise in tech-facilitated abuse referrals in 2025. Then there's the area of politics, which Centenary Action is taking a look at during these 16 days. Women are 27 times more likely to be harassed online than men. And the Inter-Parliamentary Union on Online Abuse of Women Parliamentarians found 82% of those surveyed in 39 countries had been subjected to psychological violence. 2/3 were targeted with humiliating sexual or sexist remarks, 42% extremely humiliating or sexually charged images of themselves spread through social media, and 44% being threatened with death, rape, beatings, or abduction. So we're scaring women out of getting involved in politics to the detriment of our democracies. Men and boys aren't gaining from it either. It distorts their relationships, makes it harder for them to form relationships with girls and women. They are misunderstanding consent and then getting into trouble because they have. They're targeted by misogynistic influences, causing relationship problems and discipline issues as well in school. So boys have become both victims and perpetrators. In England, over 1 million children were consulted and said the online world was one of their biggest concerns. So I said that this was kind of a rallying call, and I'd really like us all to get onto this issue and prioritise it nationally and internationally. We need to press for stronger action. It's not good enough to deal with bits of the problem or to put it onto parents or guidelines. We need legislation. Let's research the detail together. We need to be on top of it. I've deliberately used loads of facts to show that this is real and we understand it. National Council of Women has set up a research group on the topic, and there are 12 of us working on it, dividing up the topics between us to keep up to date. And UKCSWA has a working group on AI. We are thinking of having an international seminar in the spring because the tech giants have enormous resources at their disposal and extensive global reach. That means that we need to deal with this challenge by acting together internationally. And of course, those of us who are going or participating, we need to take it to the Commission on the Status of Women. One thing the National Council of Women has done is to get a resolution. You know that we work through resolutions that we pass each year at our AGM. We also wrote an AGM for an international audience, and it was passed as an emergency resolution by the European Centre of the International Council of Women. And it calls on national governments, the Council of Europe and the EU to provide speedy and robust protections for us all, but especially children and women, from the many online harms. Again, what is illegal offline should be illegal online. No one asked if they were safe before making social media, etc., available to children. we need to now save the situation, even if it's a little bit late in the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you as well to the National Council of Women for their forerunning and pioneering work on this. It's great to hear that you're looking at hosting an international seminar in spring 2026, and I'm sure all of us will be keeping our eyes peeled for the details on that. Such a compelling view on the importance of a rallying cry for attention to this topic. I think that all of us will have related to different parts of your speech there, and we'll see how this plays out. And the impact on women and girls is massive, as you've illustrated, but it has direct and indirect impact on us all. So thank you ever so much to you and to the National Council of Women. I'm now going to hand over to Atonte Semira from the UN Women UK to hear her thoughts on the issue. She's joining via audio call today.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you for sharing those very important statistics and words there. And you've really, painted. I think it's brilliant that you went first, and Natalie put it in that order, because you've really given us that good foundation of where we are right now. It's kind of gloomy, and I think that you've really explained the breadth of where we are when it comes to girls, right through to those in leadership being silenced online, and this problem has been going on for decades, and we're really at a boiling point now. Well, we're past boiling point, we're bubbling over. And what I wanted to share with you today was, well, I actually wanted to go into a little bit of detail around some of the things that are fueling the rise in, the main thing that's fueling the rise in online misogyny that is spilling out into the offline world as well. So I've got a few slides to share, so I'm just going to do that now because I think that's all working okay. Okay. Right, so I specifically thought I'd dive into the manosphere. I think it's really important for us to understand, and I'm sure many of us do understand, to dive into the detail of what's going on and what young men and boys are seeing online, and how technology is facilitating online misogyny and abuse of women and girls, and how this is also having an impact on boys' mental health and well-being, as well as Anne explained in what she shared earlier. So I'm not sure how many of you have seen the campaign video for this year's 16 Days of Activism campaign by UN Women. So I'm just going to quickly share that. It's literally about 30 seconds long. I'm just going to optimize for video real quick here. And I think the reason I wanted to share this is because I think that it really illustrates and backs up a lot of what you've just said there, Anne, and really sets us in good stead to really talk about how this is happening, how this online content is being amplified, why, and what we can do about it as well. Sorry, you're going to have to excuse me if I'm sniffing, just to give you a little bit of a warning there. I really wanted to share that because I think it highlights the level, the onslaught, the shrinking of women and girls. And what really hit my heart when I watched that video was just how the depictions of the girls and the women in that video were just trying to exist, just trying to live freely, just trying to do, fun things. It's not even just about being somebody in political leadership, or in some kind of leadership or speaking out. Even simply existing online, women and girls are facing this kind of abuse. So we already live in a world where at least 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence. We know that, unfortunately. We know that every 10 minutes a woman is killed. UN Women and UNODC data backs that up again this year. That was the statistic last year as well. And we know from a Refuge report in 2021 that 1 in 3 women experience online violence as well. But with what was happening in the offline world, there's this host of powerful AI tools trained on existing gender biases because of who is developing these tools and developing this technology, and because of how it is making people very, very rich. That is enabling that violence to spread even further in a more complex way. We really are in a perfect storm moment right now, unfortunately. So, what is the manosphere? It's a descriptive term. It's a term that's used to describe this loose network of communities of, men online who they don't say, I'm part of the manosphere. It's not a club that they belong to, but this is the way that we describe these kinds of influencers and content creators that are pushing this misogynistic content that is being specifically targeted at men and boys. And very often they're doing this in the form of dating tips, fitness tips, fatherhood. But at the same time as luring men and boys into this content, they're also promoting harmful advice and attitudes. And these groups, as we all know here, are united by an opposition to feminism. And they, misrepresent men as victims of the current social and political climate. So we're seeing this increased polarization, and a lot of what Anne talked about there again with girls and boys as well, is that we're seeing the younger generation. There was a study that came out earlier this year. We're seeing that the younger generation is becoming more and more polarized, and that's in large part to do with what's happening online and how men and boys are being radicalized online as well, and that's carrying on into the offline world as well. Because as we know, what happens online does not stay online. Online is part of the real world, is part of the offline world. So I wanted to just share a few definitions with you, because again, I don't want to assume that you all don't understand what these are, but just in case, just to give a bit of a recap for those who do understand what they are. But I think it's important that we understand, what's happening in this space, what's happening in the manosphere, what these different terms mean, what these movements are that men and boys are latching onto and forming part of. And I think it's really important when we're talking about the manosphere, and we're looking at the roots of some of these issues and these statistics that Anne shared, is that these men and boys are looking for community. That's why they're going out and searching for this content, and these are some of the ways that unfortunately these bad faith actors are attracting young men and boys to their movements, and in increasing their views on enhancing their views on misogyny. So we have over here involuntary celibates that believe that men are entitled to sex and women purposely deprive them of it. Extremist, a number of the high-profile femicide cases that we've seen in recent years in the media are linked to this incel movement. Extremist incel culture promotes rape and assault and brings together other ideologies with that. Quite often, racism and homophobia goes hand in hand with that movement as well. And they have, as I said, been linked to a number of acts of mass violence. So that's kind of the real extreme end, or the more extreme end of what's happening in the manosphere. And then I guess you have on the less extreme end here, but also can be quite extreme as well, as men's rights activists. They take a more academic tone when it comes to their claims about feminism and women's rights taking away men's rights. And sorry. Yes, when they feel and promote this idea that women gaining rights, whether that be to vote, to education, to the right to choice around their bodies, has disadvantaged men, and they preach around a society that is they preach that our society is dominated by feminine interests and that women are benefiting the most from this society at the expense of men. And this isn't to be confused with, what one might call real men's rights activists, who are fighting for fathers' rights and, paternity rights and these things. We have to be careful to not confuse the two. But this movement is very alive and well, that pits men and women against each other, and boys and girls against each other, and creates this narrative that when women win rights, that men lose out. And then we have the men going their own way movement, and I think this is a particularly sad one when we think about boys, because this teaches boys and men that society is rigged against men, and so therefore it's best to completely avoid women and even mainstream society altogether. When we go back to what I explained about the reason why a lot of men and boys are seeking out this content, is because they're looking for connection, they're looking for community, they're lonely, they're looking for tips on how to enhance and improve their lives, and then they're being fed content that's further isolating them, and leading them to extremist views and violent views in many cases towards women and girls. Pickup Artists is another one here that teaches members of this particular type of movement. And again, it's not like a club where you get a membership. It's more, they wouldn't necessarily describe, all of these people wouldn't describe themselves as being in the same movement, but they do fall under that same umbrella of pitting men and women against each other. And again, saying that women are getting rights at the expense of men's existing rights. Pickup artists teach members how to coerce women into sex and mock the idea of sexual consent. This is unfortunately a very popular type of content online that is leading to the increase in misogyny that we're seeing in the offline world as well there. Really quickly, I'll go through these. The red pill ideology, again, many of you may have heard of this before. This is described. This is described as an ideology that it goes back to. I'm sure many of you have seen the film The Matrix, where they take the red pill and they can see the real world. So this ideology says that a lot of men have now taken that red pill and they can see the real world, that we live in a world that favors women over men, which is obviously not true. But this is a movement that this was one of the earlier movements within the manosphere as well. It's been around for a number of years now. And then as part of that as well, we see the dehumanization here of women. This is some of the language that we'd see online. I think it's important for us to have an awareness of these, especially when we're thinking about the men and boys in our lives. If we're going to tackle this problem, we need to understand what's going on. Femoids, or female humanoid organisms, is an insulting term that's meant to suggest that women are not only less than men, but they're less than human. They're bots, they're objects. They don't even have a real human brain. And unfortunately, that is something that is prevalent in some of these circles, as is AWLT here. All women are like that. Again, used to stereotype women, fit them into a box, and pit men and women against each other, girls and boys against each other. And finally, there's this notion that, again, this kind of goes back to the all women are like that of hypergamy or hypergamous, which is used to refer to the fact that women are only obsessed with marrying up. They're only obsessed with men who are physically attractive and financially successful, and therefore, immoral humans. So when it comes to all of this content, what seems small soon escalates. So it starts off with this normalization around sexist jokes and memes. And what I'm explaining here is really how this kind of pathway to violence that unfortunately men and boys are being exposed to online because of the algorithms, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment here, and just being mindful of time. So the normalization of sexist jokes and memes that lower expectations, and they shift the boundaries. This is what we see a lot happening like at younger ages in primary schools and secondary schools and things as well. This is that more surface level that content that is being exposed, that our young boys and men are being exposed to online. And then again, we've got dehumanization here, which I've already spoken about with the femoids, the gold diggers. That's an old term that we're all familiar with, unfortunately. And then there's the reinforcement. I think this is a really important one, because what we're finding is that with the algorithms, and I'm not sure if you're aware, and you probably are aware of this, but even going down to the comment threads in a post on social media, the comments that boys and men are seeing, for example, versus girls and women are completely different. So this false reality is being created where men and boys are thinking that everybody feels like this, because even the comments are reflecting comments that think like this. So it's like, okay, I've seen this post, I'm not so sure about it. But when you see the comments and everyone's agreeing, it's reinforcing this idea that misogyny is okay. And then we go on to harassment and control and violence. And I'm going to speed up a little bit here because, again, being mindful of time. And I think this is a really important statistic that was in the, I'll share the link to any reports and much of the information in here after I was presented. 58.5% of cases from UK domestic homicide reviews published between 2011 and 2014 found technology was used to exercise coercive control and surveillance prior to the victim's killing. That's from the most recent report that was released on the 25th this year on femicides in 2024. So this suggests this is not being taken seriously enough. This is even being linked to the most violent form of violence against women and girls, obviously femicide there. So really quickly, I'm going to just go a little bit more into what's happening here with the AI. So AI-driven recommendation systems are learning what captures a young man's attention. And again, I'm sure you're very aware of the study that came out earlier this year around young boys as young as 11 going onto social media sites to search, pretty neutral things, and within minutes being fed misogynistic content and being taken down this pathway that from that normalization to violence that I shared in the previous couple of slides. So boys searching for fitness advice or, like I mentioned earlier, is suddenly being fed all of this toxic, misogynistic content. And he didn't go looking for this. The algorithm brought it to him. And I think that's what's really important for us to be really aware of what's happening here, is that this isn't about shaming. This is about really fixing the systems that are enabling and driving this misogynistic content that's leading to violence in the offline world. And I won't go through this in the interest of time, but I will share the link that talks about how generative AI has created these new forms of abuse, and Anne referred to some of them with deepfakes and deepfake pornography. Some of the statistics are incredibly stark. 90 to 95% of all online deepfakes are non-consensual pornographic images, with around 90% depicting women. This is hugely and largely affecting women and girls. And so again, this is Laura Bates. I'm sure you're all familiar with her, feminist activist and author who's written a recent book about all of this. There's this massive reinforcement between the explosion of AI technology and the toxic extreme misogyny of the manosphere. These AI tools are making this a million times worse in a way that we as humans could never do. And it harms every gender. So what can we do this year, 16 Days of Activism campaign? There's some call to actions. And again, I'll share the links to all of this in the chat. Together, we can campaign for the following. Again, that rallying call that Anne spoke about earlier, holding perpetrators accountable through better laws and enforcement. So what can we do? We can encourage and campaign for that. Because right now, nearly half of the world's women and girls have no legal protection from digital violence. That makes no sense. The online world is the real world. Making tech companies step up by hiring more women, because part of the reason why we're here is because these systems have been developed by men. So there are not women at the center developing these algorithms to ensure that this doesn't happen, to create safer online spaces, but also to tackle the reports of abuse and do something about it, and to remove the harmful content as well. At the moment, there's more and more technology that's making it easier to produce this harmful content. It shouldn't be going in that direction. Supporting survivors with real resources by funding women's rights organizations. Again, that's all of us here. We campaign for that. We can campaign together, and investing in preventing and culture change through digital literacy, and it is sharing the detail of exactly as I've done here about what is going on, what is happening here, what's happening to the men and boys in our society. And going back to, again, what Anne said, the only way that we can do this is if we campaign together, if we stand together. The tech giants have got billions of dollars and the highest levels of influence behind them. We can only fight this if we campaign together, if we were.
Digital technology.
I will share that video afterwards because I feel like I've definitely gone over my 10 minutes. That was a speech by Semira Bahus, and I will share that with you in the link now as well. Thank you so much for listening.
Atonte, thank you so much for such an interesting talk, especially since you're not feeling 100% today. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on this. And You're absolutely right in terms of what you say. This offline, the online world just doesn't exist in a vacuum. It soon gets brought online, and offline, and the issue of radicalization that takes place and so quickly as well is just hugely concerning. So I absolutely echo the points made by Anne and Atonte about how we really need to unite and join this call to action. But at risk of taking up some of her time, I'm going to hand over to Rebecca Zerk, joining us from the University of Aberystwyth. So over to you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak today. I feel really honoured to follow two fantastic speakers that have provided a really comprehensive and informed talks and raised some of the alarming figures of digital harms. But yeah, my name is Rebecca Zerk, and I'm a Research and Innovation Director at Dewis Choice, based at the University of Aberystwyth. For those of you who don't know, Dewis Choice is a unique initiative that combines a specialist support service for older people aged 60 years and over who have experienced domestic abuse from intimate partners and adult family members. And alongside this service provision, we are conducting long-term research into their lived experiences. I'm also a member of the Wales Assembly for Women. Little cheeky plug here: if you're a woman living in Wales or have an affinity with Wales, then please consider joining us to help raise the voices of Welsh women in global conversations. But for the next 10 minutes, I wanted to share and shine a light really on an important issue that is often invisible, which is technology and how that can be misused to perpetrate domestic abuse against older adults, and what we need to do to ensure that digital inclusion is safe and inclusive of older adults. So, as we've heard already today, we live in a world where technology is embedded in almost everything that we do: how we communicate, how we manage our money, how we stay connected to our loved ones. And technology has the potential to reduce isolation and support independence in later life. But there's also a darker reality to that too. We've already heard the alarming statistic that 1 in 3 women have experienced abuse online, whether that's perpetrated on social media or other online platforms at some point in their lives. But of these women, 1 in 6 will have experienced this from a partner or an ex-partner. We know that domestic abuse is increasingly being carried out through digital means, so monitoring, tracking, financial exploitation, and coercive control. But unlike physical abuse, for example, technology-facilitated abuse doesn't require close proximity. So a perpetrator can harm a victim survivor from the next room or even from the next country, and that can happen in real time or retrospectively. And according to a study done by Refuge, between April 2020 and May 2021, there was a 97% increase in complex domestic abuse cases involving technology-facilitated abuse that required specialist input. Yet when we think of tech abuse, we typically imagine younger people. We don't often associate this with older adults, but they experience it too. Particularly older women are affected. For older adults, they are less likely to know about technology. They have lower digital confidence. They have lower familiarity with some of these online tools. So they often ask family members or friends or partners to help with that. But that might involve handing over their passwords, depending on others to help them navigate some of those devices, which a combination of all of this can make them highly vulnerable to exploitation and forms of abuse being perpetrated online. But often these are overlooked, and then their experiences are not considered. So what does this look like in practice? Well, at Dewis Choice, we've spent over a decade now of listening to older victim survivors who've shared their stories with us. And we've seen a wide range of technology and how that's been misused. So, for example, financial exploitation is really common amongst our client group. So, for example, adult children or grandchildren or even partners using online shopping accounts or digital bankings to drain savings. This behaviour is often disguised as, oh, I'll help you with the bills, or I'll help you buy this purchase online, and then storing those card details. And this one is probably an area that we most often are aware of when it comes to older people. But there's other forms of digital abuse in this area that we see too. And, you know, we think of these when we think of younger adults, but not necessarily for older people. And that can include communication control. So we've had perpetrators that have deleted messages, blocked contacts, intercepted on video calls, really with the aim to cut that older person off from support. So to provide an example of that, one of our clients, her daughter had installed a call blocker on her mobile phone, as in her mother's mobile phone. And this meant that services that she really relied on for support, for help, with her health, but also with the domestic abuse support, were not able to contact her, and she wasn't aware that this call blocking was put on her phone. We've also seen the withholding of mobile phones, passwords, or devices. So children stepping in and saying that they'll help with the online banking services, especially with a lot of banks now closing and the big push and move to online banking. But that really enforcing that dependence on that family member to access their banking details. And some of our clients have said they haven't seen a bank statement or have no idea how much is in their bank account. And that's for a number of years. So they've just lost all control over managing their own finances. We also see tracking and surveillance, so hidden GPS devices, software installed on people's phones, the use of kind of nanny cams, which are largely marketed for people with dementia and quite promoted that actually we should have cameras installed in older people's homes as a way to protect them from outside danger, but them being misused then to really monitor and surveil that older person and see who's coming in and controlling who's coming in and out of our household. And also smart devices. So we had an older woman, she was diagnosed with dementia, and she used her smart device to set reminders for taking her medication and to remind her when she had medical appointments, dental appointments, etc. And her ex-husband, which she'd fled earlier, a couple of years previous, from long-standing domestic abuse, well, he gained access to her smart device. And given that a lot of these devices are set up with security passwords or security questions, if you forget those, which typically are something like, what's your mother's maiden name? If you've been in a relationship with someone, an intimate relationship with someone or a family member, you're very much likely to know the answer to some of those questions and be able to access that device. But the ex-husband had accessed her smart device and was deleting her reminders. So he was able to monitor when she had appointments. He would disrupt those appointments and make sure that she missed them. And he would delete her notifications for when to take her medication. And it was believed that he did this to isolate her and to continue to control her post-separation. Now, we know that digital abuse, the figures suggest that it increases at the point of post-separation. But we also see the potential for smart home devices to be manipulated. So heating, lighting, door locks, cameras, all of which can be controlled remotely. Sometimes these might be used to frighten someone, to gaslight someone, and for older people particularly, to make them feel like they're losing their mind, or that they have the onset of dementia, so that they can further create a dependency of the victim survivor on them. For older adults particularly, we know that technology abuse can be often masked as care. We did some work in community settings with older adults. We spoke to a range of practitioners, and we also had a look at the marketing of existing technology. And what we found is that perpetrators or people in a caring position will often suggest that their behaviour is done out of care for that person. So they'll say things like, I can fix it for you. I just need you to give me your password so I can access it. Or don't worry about that. I've sorted it out now, so you don't need to worry about it. Or you'll get scammed, so let me help you with your money, and using that kind of fear of being defrauded from someone else to gain access to those account details or their passwords. And this intention isn't always support. The intention is control. But there is a blurred line between caregiving and coercion, and a line that practitioners have told us that they're not very confident in spotting. So when we're thinking about technology facilitated abuse, or when we're thinking about the use of technology, even if the intention was to support the individual, we really need to be questioning, is this necessary? Is this proportionate? And most importantly, is this what the older person is consenting to? And does it allow that person to live with dignity and independence? So with the development of new technologies, we know that risk is growing. There's a huge national push to get older adults online, as I've mentioned, with banking, healthcare, and essential services. And whilst this is positive, digital inclusion without building in the necessary safeguards that increase those risks of digital abuse means that we're failing to protect older adults to these new vulnerabilities that they may be experiencing online. So we need to have safety education, protective measures put in place. When we're developing new technologies, we should be doing those with looking at what the safeguarding practices are alongside those, and what is in place to safeguard that older adult. But also, we need greater awareness that tech abuse isn't just a youth issue. Older people too are affected. We need better training and practice tools for practitioners. So when older adults are experiencing technology facilitated abuse, they're spotting those signs, and they're being acted upon. But also we need continued research and investment, particularly into abuse from adult children as a form of domestic abuse, because this is still largely understood. And just as a final a thought, really, to what we've been doing as a project, is we've developed a tool for practitioners, for frontline practitioners, that is developed in collaboration with Dyfed-Powys Police Force and an organisation called PEGS, who are doing some fantastic work on adult child-to-parent abuse, looking at how technology is misused by older adults, how some of the dynamics of coercive control are featuring online, but how we can safely and respond to those older adults' needs and collect evidence effectively and use the law effectively to ensure that we are including older people in our safeguarding responses, in our criminal justice responses. And that piece of work was funded by the National Community Fund. We see it as a positive step in terms of including older people in these conversations. There's some fantastic resources that already exist. If you haven't already seen Refuge's tech safety online tool, where you can move around the house and see what different smart devices can do and how you can protect yourself, I would definitely recommend having a look at that. And Get Safe Online have done some fantastic work as well. But what we have intended to do, and we're continuing to do, is to ensure that our work is complementing that, but providing that age-in lens to ensure that older people are included in the conversations around technology facilitated abuse. So on that note, I think I'm at time. I'm sorry if I went over a little bit there, but thank you for listening, and thank you for coming along today. And I hope that you'll all continue to have these conversations about digital abuse and inclusive of older people, to ensure that they're not left behind or placed at greater risk in this increasingly digital world that we are living in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you to Dewis Choice. And I see that we've also got Cara Rainbow joining us today. For all of your work on this and for highlighting the importance of remembering older women in this conversation. I think often when we think about digital harms, it's easy to revert to thinking about younger people. It's often the narrative that we see more in mainstream media and so on, but you really highlight the issue of the adult-child dynamic from the flip side. And it's so important that we think about all of these different dynamics and how they play out, and the importance of education. So from our fantastic panel, we've covered a broad spectrum of issues. Anne gave us sight on all issues, and she highlighted the importance of sight on all issues, that organisations often will focus on particular things, but it's really important that we look at this from a bird's eye view. Atonte began by discussing the impact on the girl child and went on to elaborate on the importance of understanding different terminology, refreshing on this all the time as it constantly evolves, and the impact on women and girls. And then Rebecca closed by highlighting the importance of all of this on older women and how intimate relationships and familial relationships actually can pose a threat too. So this idea of digital harms doesn't necessarily mean that it's just about exposure to the wider world, but actually it can be within the home too. So I just wanted to hand over to ask if there's any questions at all from anyone who's joined us today for any of our panelists. Leslie, let me hand over to you. You're on mute, Leslie. While Leslie is finding her unmute button. Oh, here we are.
I was behaving by turning it off. I apologize. Thank you, all of you, for all the evidence you've so carefully gathered. And I'm sure many of us were aware of some of it, part of it, etc. But you put it so very succinctly. I've worked in the last few years on, for example, with some of the media in places like Sri Lanka, where I worked with some young, really enthusiastic techies who were trying to combat this. I worked also with people in Sri Lanka who we drew up a charter for media, both digital and traditional media, on sort of guidelines for media on gender issues. However, the big question is, if I can put it in very blunt language, what the hell do we do about it? As you've all highlighted, we're up against huge tech bros, Goliaths, with masses of power, masses of money. And every time I hear groups trying to do stuff, they can write nice letters to these to tech bros who say, oh, they're employing people to do this and this. But we're getting nowhere. What do we do? And the Second thing, which I don't think I heard anyone mention, perhaps you did subtly, but is I have no evidence on this, but it seems from what I'm listening to other people, my own experiences, even when you apply for work, the entities doing the first deciding who's on the short list are also bots, robots, whatever you want to call it, who carry the same misogyny because it's been the clones that they've been taught on. And that's also, I think, needs some more in-depth research, but there seems to be growing evidence of that too. So what do? We don't have power, most of us, and we don't have the money.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's unite on this. Let's keep each other informed on what we're doing, and let's do it together. So I think National Council of Women, next step is we will get in touch with the Department of Health. And last time when we wrote to the Department for Information, lots of you co-signed a letter, so that was great. So maybe we could do that again, a co-signed letter. I think Department of Health is raising the issue in a different context, and that will really help. Because they're not focused on the economic benefits of social media. And then the other thing is to work internationally. And again, we can cooperate on that. So it's not just the Commission on the Status of Women, and that's very important as well. But I think this idea of us all getting together and running an international seminar is a good idea. We've got really good links with the Portuguese, Greeks, Spanish, Canadians, and Australians on this. And I expect that you guys have got more as well. And any ideas on funding for it, of course, are always welcome. Yeah.
I was just going to add a couple of things, agree with everything Anne said there. It is really difficult and tricky, and totally hear you, Leslie, on it's something that we're really grappling with, right, as a movement. I think first and foremost, like Anne said, is we have to find a way to be strategic and very clear in our messaging, in the pushback, and in uniting together. I think that's what a lot of the campaign this year has tried to do, with being very, very focused with like some key phrasing and things. But I think also the being able to have the conversations with the data, because I know we've shared a lot of data today as well. We have to get more people on board, and especially we need to get men engaged as well. And I think for men, a lot of it is the data and the figures, which is why I know Natalie said that she'd try and send out the links after this call. I think is keep getting clued up on that as well, and being able to share that with men in particular, and getting them involved in this as well, because it's affecting men and boys as well, as we've discussed extensively today, and affecting us all. And then again, echoing what Anne said about the international connecting internationally, obviously other countries are doing a better job in some areas than we are, and maybe perhaps we're doing a better job in some areas that other countries are, and obviously CSW is going to be a big one for it as well. But I think looking at what's happening on the international stage as well, and seeing what we can platform here in the UK as well, some of the solutions might be helpful as well. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It really is. And I'm hoping that this year's CSW we can align around this in a really, we can be more strategic in our response to this.
Yeah.
Can I just make a quick reply to that? It's great. I'm so pleased you are doing all this. I mean, it's desperately needed. But those of us who are old enough to remember the anti-apartheid, and this is a sort of apartheid campaign, it really, one of the main things that made it succeed was when people were hit in their pockets, the people who had power. And
yeah,
and there were, Wendy's nodding there, you probably remember, and they were boycotted, etc., etc. And you know, letters help, a few demonstrations help. I'm not downplaying any of this. We've all worked very hard on these things, but everybody knows at some level, not as well informed as the group here, what's going on. But until you hit people in the pocket, and also it's very difficult. The argument comes back, and I feel this as a former journalist, is how you overcome the argument of free speech versus etc. But I certainly think we need to think of how to think of maybe some consumer boycotts in some way. I don't know. I just don't know. But
Rebecca, did you want to add something to that?
I mean, from a domestic abuse perspective, we have legal protections in place. We have the law that we can use if technology facilitated abuse is happening in a domestic abuse context. But I think the awareness of those laws on that frontline practice is not where it should be. I think there needs to be greater awareness of this being experienced across the life course as well. And there's been some really great apps that have been created that allow victims, survivors to start collecting that evidence of online abuse. So I think it's more about raising awareness of that and looking at our statutory definition of domestic abuse and ensuring that technology facilitated abuse is in that. I mean, I know it is in Northern Ireland, and it is in our statutory guidance that accompanies the Act. But I think if it was flagged up rightful and in centre in the definition, that would help. And then I just wanted to add to really what has already been said about calling it out and involving men in these conversations. I think there is these algorithms that are targeting young boys about different like misogynistic and attitudes, but it's about how can we have positive conversations with men in schools and in education, and also have role model men speaking out and against these things. I've got two colleagues who've just been doing some work for the White Ribbon Day and speaking out against violence against women online and rallying other men up to support that. And they had a march at the weekend. Cara, who's on the call, was part of organising that. So I think when we need to think about what can we do in the short term while we're applying this pressure and advocating for change. What can we be doing in terms of rallying up and continuing that conversation and countering some of these harmful attitudes to make sure that this is still at the forefront, because sometimes things have media newsworthy and then that moment passes and we lose the buzz. So I think we need to all keep banging that drum to ensure that it remains that priority.
I agree, and I think one thing that's emerged from this discussion is the importance of unity, as Anne said, that we all need to unite, and that includes men and boys in the discussion too. Just to bring in some of the comments from the chat about different ways that we can unite and the use of networks. So Lindsay Green has said that Sir Optimist global campaign is concentrating on prevention of digital issues over the 16 days of activism and has 66,000 women, which is a fantastic network. And those 66,000 women will have their own networks. So as long as we can continue to use our voices and use the online space for good to share that message, then that's fantastic. And we also have a comment from Mandy Marshall, who said that the Anglican Communion works through churches internationally, as does the Anglican Alliance. And they're running an online campaign through the 16 Days of Activism through the Anglican Women's Network and the Anglican Youth Network. And it's all fantastic stuff. And it all contributes to this tower of unity, which is really powerful. Does anyone have a final question for our panel before we finish up? I think some questions have been followed up in the chat. Okay, let's hand over to you, Susan.
It's not so much a question as in what we can do. We need more women in STEM. We need more women doing these algorithms and putting that in. So we need to actually be doing this with our youth. We need to be encouraging them to get involved in this instead of shying away from it. Because what we've seen in X is that quite a lot of organisations have moved away from X because it's toxic. But actually, how can we change anything if we're not putting ourselves out there to put the narrative out that that's different? Because then that's just enforcing that algorithm. And I think the understanding of how the coding works and how the algorithm works is how we tackle this. And I think like the marketing of it we have to be better at what we market and make sure that actually we are explaining the reasons why, because we're all good at knowing, but we don't share what's actually happening enough on these sites so that we can try and rewrite or move the algorithm in a different way. So I think we need to be looking at that. We need to be looking at getting young girls in STEM and keeping them in STEM, because that is a way that we try and reduce the misogyny that's built into these systems.
Yeah, then can I just comment on that? I completely agree, and I think that needs to come hand in hand with these safeguards. So if we are encouraging young people and women to go online and to challenge some of these attitudes, that what to do if they do experience this harmful behaviour in terms of the reporting button, but also support services that are there to help them navigate some of that.
Yeah, we need that strength from the government as well. The online safety bill was weakened because they took women out of it so they could pass the bill. I mean, if that doesn't tell you anything, then that we're fighting an uphill battle, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And I think you're right, we need protection of the women that are challenging these things. Laura Bates is an example of someone who's out there challenging this. She's got people sending her all sorts of threats and stuff like that, but actually she's not backing down from it, and she's actually saying that she wants to help the men and the boys as well. And I think if we do that and say we want to take you on this journey and we want to help what your life, because that's the way we have to market this. Yes, your life is pretty bad at the moment, but that's not due to women, that's due to the structural issues of the patriarchy that have caused this. So actually we need to tackle this together to ensure that we all live in unity and we all have equality in life. And I think this is where we're getting it wrong, because it is seeming sometimes as if it's men against women, and actually we should be taking them on that journey with us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Lindsay and then Anne before we close. Oh, Lindsay, I'm struggling to hear you. It says you're not on mute, but it's quite difficult to hear. Not sure if your microphone is connected. No, I can't hear you. Perhaps what we could do is we could pass over to Anne and then Lindsay, if you want to have a look at your microphone in the meantime.
Yes, I wanted to say that we also need to support women who are already in the tech industry. And National Council of Women has reached out to some of those, and we've got a couple involved in our study group. And, you know, it may not be quite as comfortable as talking to ourselves. They're going to have a slightly different perspective. But we really need to hear from them, and we need to know what's realistic and what they can achieve, how they can work on the issue of algorithms and so on. So, yeah, I agree that we need to work on women in STEM.
Absolutely. Shall we, Lindsay, let's try and hear from you again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Just that I think the presentations and the information that we've heard this afternoon has been absolutely amazing. But we've only had 19 people on this call. And I just think there must be a way of getting the information we've heard this afternoon out to a wider audience. It's so important that this information is spread a bit further than just us. And is there some way that we can YouTube it or get it out there that we can all then share it? Because I know that there's other Seroptimists that would really have enjoyed. We've had Pat and Susan on today, but I think, and Mo's, Wendy's a Seroptimist as well. And I just think that if we could share it and share it with UN Women UK and all the other people that we've got that we're connected to, we'd actually have a really big influence, because what we've heard today has been really important, and I think it would be good if we could find a way of sharing it. And in the chat on the WhatsApp, I've put an event that's in the Caribbean, but I can't find a way of sharing it on here because this isn't my machine. But I put it in the WhatsApp group, which is on the 3rd of December. So people are invited to fly away on Zoom to the Caribbean. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the, albeit virtual, invitation to the Caribbean. But good news, we have recorded this session, and we will be looking to upload it to YouTube as soon as possible. So when that link is available, I will circulate it and it can be shared amongst our networks. As you say, it's really important that we can try and get the reach, the widest reach we possibly can. Okay, so final comment to be from Hannah, and then we will close.
Hi, thank you very much. I just want to say it was really brilliant. It was a really interesting conversation, all the stats, all the data, all the information. I just wanted to say, engaging women in STEM. My sister is a scientist, and she does genetics and immunology and many things that I'm not really too sure of. But within the field, and I know not just within science, but in tech, these industries are so old school, regardless of how modernized they really are, that I know, watching my sister, how in pain she has been from constantly competing just to prove herself because she's a woman. And honestly, it's got to a point, there are times where, you can see she's about to burn out or things that are happening, and you're like, just find an easier life. Like, it must be easier. But it is notoriously difficult as a structure, and they're one of the oldest structures that won't modernize. So I think while there is an element of trying to engage women in STEM to keep them in STEM, we have to also look at the structure, because it's just not healthy as well. It should be a much healthier structure and system nowadays to get people to want to stay. And also, not just that, it's notoriously male dominated. And so it's very uncomfortable for a lot of women to go into. And then the comments that they get, where you're like, oh, what, are you on your period all the time? Or oh, are you sure you want to have children? Because, time's ticking. And you'd think people would be far more progressive in their thought if they're in these industries, but they really aren't, because they're just very literal with their specialism. So I think there are so many different factors here that we need to focus on within these industries that are layered in the institution that can eventually help women and the development of everyone. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And you're absolutely right. This is so important, the inclusion of women in STEM, but in a meaningful way. And that we actually have the allyship of men and boys. And that's something that Rebecca highlighted as well, that importance. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you to those of you who also watch the recording back and circulate it amongst your own networks. I do encourage everyone to do so and become part of this really important conversation. There are many other events being held for the 16 Days of Activism that can be found online, and particularly on the NAWO website. So please have a look at that. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again for the next Alliance meeting.